For 68-year-old Martha, winning a $4 million lottery was a dream come true. Her first thought was to share it all with her loving family, her husband, her 2 children, and her sister. But the dream quickly curdles into a nightmare. Almost overnight, her beloved family transforms into a pack of greedy, entitled strangers, each with their own demands for a piece of the prize. The day I won $4 million in the state lottery was the second happiest day of my life. The happiest, as it turns out, was the day that winning ticket finally made my entire greedy and beloved family disown me. This is not the story of how money bought me happiness. This is the story of how it bought me the cold, hard, and glorious truth. It is the story of how it bought me my freedom. Dear friends, we're so happy you're here with us today. Every time you join, it gives us the chance to share stories that might inspire you, guide you, or even change the way you see things. Your comments and support mean the world to us, and we're truly grateful. Tell us, what challenges have you faced in life, or maybe you're facing right now? We might just find a story that feels close to yours, and who knows, it could be exactly what you need. So stay with us. Don't miss what's coming next. But before the lawyers, before the bitter arguments, before the loving warmth in my own children's eyes was replaced by the cold glint of avarice, there was a simple, ordinary Tuesday in Atlanta, a life that I believed was a quiet and happy one. My name is Martha, and I am 68 years old. My life has been a simple one, a good one. I was a wife of 45 years to my husband, David, a retired postal worker. I was a mother to 2 grown children, Michael and Jessica, who had families of their own. I was a sister to Brenda. My life was a small, tightly woven fabric of these relationships, and I believed it was a strong and beautiful thing. We had never been rich. David's pension and my social security were enough to live on, but we lived a life of careful budgets and small, deferred dreams. Our home was a modest, paid-for brick ranch, the kind with a neat lawn and a garden I tended to with a fierce, loving pride. Our joys were simple. Sunday dinners with the family, the birth of our grandchildren, the quiet, comfortable companionship of a long and steady marriage. My family, I believed, was my greatest treasure. My husband, David, was a good man. Though he had a worrier's soul, his conversation constantly circling back to the bills, the cost of things, the money we didn't have. My sister, Brenda, was a woman who seemed to lurch from one small self-inflicted drama to the next, always with a new story of woe, a new tale of a hard luck life that was never quite her fault. And my children, my beautiful children. Michael, a contractor whose business always seemed to be on the verge of either a great success or a complete collapse, and Jessica, a stay-at-home mom to my 2 wonderful grandchildren, married to a good but perpetually underpaid teacher. They were good kids, but they were needy. They still leaned on us, on me, for 100 small things. A little help with a car repair, a babysitter on short notice, a sympathetic ear for their endless financial complaints. I was the family matriarch, the soft place for everyone to land, and I believed that was my purpose. My love for them was unconditional. I did not realize, until it was too late, that their love for me was not. The act that would ultimately detonate this seemingly perfect family picture was a small, insignificant one. Every Tuesday, when I went to the grocery store, I would buy a lottery ticket. It was a $5 ritual, a quiet little prayer for a bit of breathing room, a little less worry for David, a little more help for the kids. I always played the same numbers. My wedding anniversary, my children's birthdays, and the year my own dear mother had passed. They were the numbers of my life, of my love. That Tuesday was no different. I bought my ticket, the flimsy slip of paper a familiar weight in my hand. I tucked it into a small pocket in my wallet next to a faded photograph of my late mother. I went home. I put away the groceries, and I thought nothing more of it. I was completely, blissfully, and tragically unaware that the small $5 prayer I had just purchased was not a ticket to a life of ease. It was a lit match, and I was about to drop it onto the beautiful, carefully constructed, and seemingly perfect illusion of my loving family. The drawing was on Wednesday night, as it always was. I watched the local news, half listening to the announcer read the winning numbers, a familiar ritual that never resulted in anything more than a torn-up ticket and a quiet sigh. I jotted the numbers down on the back of an envelope, and then, distracted by a pot of soup simmering on the stove, I completely forgot about them. The ticket, the flimsy little piece of paper that held my entire future, sat in my wallet, forgotten, for 2 whole days. It was on Friday morning that my world tilted on its axis. I was at the kitchen table paying our monthly bills, a task that always left a tight, anxious knot in my stomach. I was a few dollars short for the water bill. I was shuffling through my purse looking for an old coupon when my fingers brushed against the lottery ticket. On a whim, I pulled it out, along with the envelope where I'd scribbled the winning numbers. It was a mechanical, hopeless act. The last little dance of a foolish ritual before I would have to call my son, Michael, and ask to borrow a small amount of money, an act that always filled me with a quiet sense of maternal failure. I laid the ticket on the table and began to compare the numbers. The first number, 12, my wedding anniversary, matched. A small, happy coincidence, I thought. The second number, 4, my son's birthday month, matched. Well, isn't that something? The third number, 21, my daughter's birthday, matched. My heart gave a little flutter. The fourth, 8, my husband's birthday month, matched. My hand holding the pen began to tremble. The fifth, 19, the year my mother passed, matched. I stopped breathing. The world seemed to shrink, to narrow down to the small, cheap piece of paper on my kitchen table. There was only one number left, the Powerball. The number was 5, my weekly $5 prayer. My eyes scanned to the last number on the ticket. It was a 5. I did not scream. I did not shout. A strange, profound silence filled my head, my house, my world. I checked the numbers again, and a third time. And a fourth. I was not mistaken. I, Martha Miller, a 68-year-old retiree from Atlanta, Georgia, was holding a piece of paper worth $4 million. My husband, David, was in the garage tinkering with the old lawnmower, muttering as he always was about the cost of getting it repaired. I walked to the garage, my movements slow and dreamlike, the ticket held in my trembling hand as if it were a sacred relic. "David," I whispered, my voice a strange hoarse sound. He looked up, wiping a smear of grease from his forehead. "What is it, Martha?" "You look like you've seen a ghost." I couldn't speak. I just held out the ticket and the envelope with the numbers. He took them, a look of annoyed confusion on his face. I watched him as he compared the numbers, his expression shifting from impatience to curiosity, to a slow, dawning, and complete disbelief. His face, a landscape I had known for 45 years, seemed to crumble and then reform. The deep lines of a lifetime of financial worry instantly, miraculously, smoothed away. He looked up at me, his eyes wide. "Martha," he whispered, "is this real?" And then the joy hit. It was a physical force, an explosion of pure, unadulterated relief. David, my quiet, anxious, steady husband, let out a whoop of such pure, primal joy that it echoed through the garage. He grabbed me by the waist, lifted me off the ground, and spun me around, the two of us laughing like school children, tears of disbelief and happiness streaming down our faces. Later that day, after the initial dizzying shock had subsided, we sat at our kitchen table. The very table where I had been worrying about a water bill just hours before, and we let ourselves dream. For the first time in our lives, the dreams were not constrained by the grim gray walls of our budget. "We can finally fix the roof," David said, his voice full of a quiet awe. "And the transmission in the car. We can get you that new walk-in shower you wanted." His dreams were so practical, so modest, so born of a lifetime of making do. My dreams were for our family. "We can help the children, David," I said, my heart overflowing with a generosity that now had a means of expression. "We can pay off the loans for Michael's contracting business. We can give Jessica and Tom a real down payment for a house, get them out of that cramped little apartment. And Brenda, oh, David, we can finally help my sister get on her feet." We were united in our joy, in our shared, selfless vision. This money was not for us. It was for them. It was a gift, a blessing that we would pour out upon the people we loved most in the world. We decided to tell them all at once. We would host a special Sunday dinner, a celebration. I called them all, Michael, Jessica, Brenda, and told them I had some wonderful, life-changing news to share. Their curiosity was piqued, their voices full of questions I happily deflected. That Sunday, my house was filled with the rich, celebratory smells of a standing rib roast and a sweet potato pie. It was a meal I normally would have considered a wild extravagance, but now it felt like a perfect symbol of our new life. David and I worked together in the kitchen, our movements light, our hearts full. Just before our guests were due to arrive, I took the winning lottery ticket and placed it in a small, simple silver frame. I set it on the center of the mantelpiece, a quiet, shining testament to the miracle that had just befallen our family. We stood there for a moment, arm in arm, looking at that small piece of paper that held all of our new, beautiful dreams. We were about to give our family the world. It never once occurred to us that in return they would try to take our souls. The Sunday of the announcement, my house, which was usually a place of quiet, comfortable routine, was filled with a vibrant, chaotic energy. My sister Brenda arrived first, as she always did, a whirlwind of complaints about the traffic, her leaky roof, and the general injustice of the world, all of which I listened to with a new, secret smile. "Not for long, my dear sister," I thought, as I poured her a glass of iced tea. "Your rainy days are over." Then came the children. Jessica arrived with her husband Tom and my two beautiful grandchildren, 8-year-old Lily and 6-year-old Noah. They burst through the door like a small, happy hurricane, filling the rooms with their laughter and demands for cookies. Jessica looked tired. The familiar lines of financial worry etched around her eyes, and my heart ached with a joyful, secret promise. "Soon, honey," I thought. "You'll be able to rest soon." Michael, my son, arrived last, alone, his wife working a weekend shift at the hospital. He hugged me, the tension in his shoulders a familiar testament to the constant stress of running his own small contracting business, a business that was always teetering on the edge. I just held him a little tighter, knowing the good news I was about to deliver would finally give him the breathing room he so desperately needed. We all gathered around the dining room table, a loud, imperfect, but deeply loved family. David, my husband, sat at the head of the table, a quiet, stunned joy still radiating from him. I looked at the faces of the people I loved most in this world, at their worries and their small, everyday struggles, and my heart felt like it would burst with the sheer, magnificent power of the gift I was about to give them. After the last of the rib roast had been eaten, as I was serving up slices of my sweet potato pie, David stood up. He cleared his throat, his hands trembling just slightly. "Your mother and I," he began, his voice a little hoarse. "We gathered you all here today because we have some news to share." Something that's going to change all of our lives. For the better, he didn't have to say another word. He just turned and gestured with his hand toward the living room, toward the mantelpiece. He pointed to the small, simple silver frame that now held the winning lottery ticket. A confused silence fell over the table. Michael was the first to get up. He walked into the living room, peered at the ticket, and then let out a shout that rattled the windows. "No way! Is this for real?" The room erupted. In an instant, everyone was on their feet, crowding around the mantelpiece, a chorus of disbelieving shouts, of laughter, of pure, unadulterated joy. Jessica was weeping, hugging me so tightly I could barely breathe. Brenda was screaming with delight. The grandchildren, caught up in the chaotic happiness, were dancing around the room. It was perfect. It was a moment of pure, shared family bliss for about 10 minutes. After the initial shock wore off, the nature of the celebration began to subtly, almost imperceptibly, shift. The joy for us slowly began to morph into a joy for themselves. "Well," Michael said, clapping his father on the back with a laugh that was a little too loud, "I guess this means I can finally get that new work truck I've been needing. A man can't run a business with a beat-up old Ford." "Thanks, Mom and Dad." He said it like a joke, but his eyes were shining with a hard, speculative light. "Oh my God, Tom," Jessica said to her husband, her voice a high-pitched squeal of excitement. "Does this mean we can finally start looking for a real house? With a yard for the kids? We could finally move out of that horrible apartment." Brenda, my sister, was the least subtle of all. Her joy had already been replaced by a familiar litany of her own woes, now presented not as problems but as items on an invoice. "Thank the Lord," she said, dabbing at her dry eyes with a napkin. "My car is on its very last legs, and you know the landlord is raising my rent again. This is a prayer answered, a real prayer." They were no longer celebrating our good fortune. They were spending it. Their dreams, their needs, their wants had instantly become the sole purpose of our miracle. They didn't ask us what we planned to do with the money. They didn't ask about our own long-deferred dreams. They simply presented us with theirs, with the full and smiling expectation that we would now be the bank to fund them all. I stood in the middle of the room, a quiet, invisible observer at the center of the storm of my family's sudden, ravenous greed. The beautiful, selfless joy I had felt just an hour ago was beginning to curdle into a cold, heavy unease in the pit of my stomach. Later that evening, after they had all finally gone, leaving a happy, celebratory mess in their wake, David and I were cleaning up the kitchen. He was still buzzing with a generous, paternal excitement. "Wasn't that wonderful, Martha?" he said, his face shining. "Just wonderful." "We're going to be able to change all their lives." I just nodded, my own smile feeling thin and brittle. As I was wiping down the counter, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Michael. I opened it. It wasn't a thank you note. It was a link from the Ford website to a brand new, top-of-the-line, fully loaded F-250 pickup truck. The price at the bottom was over $60,000. Beneath the link was a single sentence. "Found the perfect one. Let me know when we can go pick it up. Love you." I stared at the picture of the $60,000 truck my son expected me to buy for him. It was not a request. It was a demand wrapped in the guise of a loving text. The joy of our miracle was officially over, replaced by the cold, heavy, and crushing weight of expectation. I had won $4 million, and in doing so, it seemed I had just acquired 4 million new problems. And they all had the faces of the people I loved most in this world. The morning after our big announcement, the house was quiet, but it was a different kind of quiet. It was not the peaceful, contented silence of our old life. It was the heavy, expectant silence of a theater after the curtain has gone up, the audience waiting impatiently for the main act to begin. And I, it seemed, was the star of a show I had never agreed to be in. The phone started ringing at 8 a.m. It was Michael. He wasn't calling to ask how I was. He was calling to talk about payload capacity and towing packages for the truck he had already mentally purchased. An hour later, Jessica called, her voice a breathless rush of real estate listings for houses in a gated community we could never have afforded in our wildest dreams. Then came Brenda, my sister, with a long, tearful, and meticulously detailed account of every single debt she had ever accumulated. I felt like I was under siege. The $4 million, which had felt like a shield just 2 days ago, a barrier against all of life's worries, now felt like a giant, flashing neon sign that said, "The Bank of Martha is open for business." And my family were the first and most demanding customers in line. But the most painful and profound change was not in them. It was in my husband, David, the man I had loved and lived with for 45 years. The constant low-grade anxiety about money had been the central organizing principle of his entire life. He was a man who worried about the cost of coffee, who saved old rubber bands, who lived in a state of perpetual financial dread. And now that the dread was gone, a vast empty space had been created in his soul, and it was being filled hour by hour with a new and unfamiliar poison: greed. He stopped tinkering with the lawnmower in the garage. He stopped his endless, worried puttering. Instead, he spent his days in front of our old, slow desktop computer, a manic, glassy-eyed excitement on his face that I had never seen before. He was not looking at new roofing estimates or sensible, fuel-efficient cars. He was looking at a world we had never had access to, and he was diving in head first. "Martha, come look at this!" he called out to me one afternoon, his voice a boyish, excited shout. I walked into our small den. He had a website open, a glossy, glittering page showcasing a 40-foot-long, state-of-the-art recreational vehicle. It was a rolling palace with leather interiors, satellite television, and a price tag that was more than what we had paid for our entire house. "Isn't she a beauty?" he said, his eyes shining. "We could take it on the road, Martha. See the country. No more cheap motels for us. We could go wherever we want. Whenever we want." I looked at the monstrous, absurdly luxurious vehicle on the screen, and then at my husband, a man whose idea of a lavish vacation had always been a weekend trip to a nearby state park. "David, it's a lot," I said, trying to choose my words carefully. "I thought we were going to use the money to get our affairs in order first. Help the kids, fix the house." "The kids can wait," he said, his voice taking on a new, hard and impatient edge. "Brenda can wait. We've been helping them our entire lives. This is for us, Martha, for me. I've worked like a dog for 50 years, punching a clock, worrying about every single penny. I have earned this. I have a right to enjoy the fruits of our good fortune, our good fortune." It was the first time I realized he didn't see the lottery ticket as a random miracle. He saw it as a long overdue payment for his own suffering, and he was the one who had the right to decide how it was spent. "I'm the man of this house, Martha," he said, his tone now deeply patronizing. "I'll handle the big financial decisions from here on out. You don't have to worry your pretty little head about it anymore." I stood there, stunned into silence. In the space of a few short days, my partner, my equal, had transformed into a benevolent, smiling dictator. The money hadn't just removed his anxiety, it had inflated his ego to a monstrous new size. I was no longer his wife. I was a beneficiary, a child to be managed and patted on the head. I was completely and utterly alone in my own marriage. The final, undeniable proof of this came 3 days later. I had been out in my garden, the only place where I could still find a semblance of peace, of my old, simple life. When I came back inside, I heard a low, powerful rumbling in the driveway. I looked out the front window, and my heart sank. Sitting in our driveway, a gleaming black and obscenely large Lincoln Navigator, the kind of vehicle movie stars and gangsters drove, had replaced our sensible 10-year-old sedan. David stepped out of it, a huge, boyish grin on his face. He dangled the keys in front of him. "Surprise!" he shouted, his voice booming with a new unearned confidence. "I got us a new ride." Traded in the old clunker. Had to pull a bit of a credit advance against the winnings before they're released, but it was worth it. The first of our new toys. He stood there beaming, expecting me to be thrilled, to run into his arms. All I could see was a $60,000 monument to his newfound selfishness. I looked at the monstrous, gas-guzzling beast that was now blocking out the sun in my driveway. I looked at the strange, manic, and greedy man who was wearing my husband's face. I hadn't just won $4 million. I had lost my husband to it, and I had a sick, sinking feeling that he was only the first of many casualties. The arrival of the $60,000 Lincoln Navigator in my driveway was not just a purchase, it was a declaration of independence. David's independence from me, from our 45 years of shared, careful frugality, and from the quiet, respectful partnership I thought we had. The monstrous, gleaming black vehicle was a monument to his new identity, an identity that was being forged, day by day, in the fires of our newfound and unearned wealth. My quiet, gentle protestations were swatted away like annoying flies. "Martha, you just don't understand how this works," he'd say, his voice full of a condescending pity. "When you have money, you have to look like you have money. It's about image. It's about projecting success." He was a retired postal worker who had, just a few weeks ago, been clipping coupons for canned peas, and he was now lecturing me on the importance of projecting an image. The speed of his transformation was terrifying. The children, of course, saw the new car as a starting pistol. If Dad was getting his toys, then their own were long overdue. The texts and phone calls, which had been a steady, demanding stream, now became a flood. Jessica was the most relentless. She would call me every single day, her voice a breathless, excited rush as she described in excruciating detail the latest house she had found on Zillow. They were no longer the modest 3-bedroom suburban homes she had once dreamed of. They were mini mansions in gated communities with swimming pools and 3-car garages. "And the best part, Mom," she said to me one afternoon, "is that if you give us the down payment, which would only be about $200,000, we could get pre-approved for the mortgage right away. The interest rates are just perfect right now." It's an investment, really. For the whole family. An investment in what, Jessica? I asked, my voice weary. "In our future, Mom," she said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "In the grandchildren's future. Don't you want them to grow up in a nice neighborhood with good schools?" The guilt, the subtle, poisoned barb at the end of every sentence was a new and ugly weapon in her arsenal. The implication was clear. If I did not give her what she wanted, I did not truly love my own grandchildren. Michael, my son, was more direct. His $60,000 truck was just the beginning. Now he needed a new boat for the lake house he didn't own, a new set of golf clubs for the country club he hadn't joined, and a substantial 6-figure investment to finally take his business to the next level. My own sister Brenda was perhaps the most shameless of all. She didn't even bother with the pretense of a long-term investment. She simply showed up at my house one afternoon, her face a mask of practiced misery, and presented me with a shoebox full of maxed-out credit card bills, unpaid medical invoices, and a foreclosure notice on her small rented apartment. "I'm at the end of my rope, Martha," she wept, her tears a performance I had seen 100 times before, though never with such high stakes. "If you could just clear all this for me, just this one time, I could finally get a fresh start." The total in the shoebox was over $50,000. I was drowning. My family, the people I had loved and supported my entire life, had transformed almost overnight into a pack of hungry, circling sharks, and I was the bait. The joy of the lottery win was a distant, faded memory, replaced by a constant, grinding anxiety that was 1,000 times worse than our old money worries. Our old worries were about making ends meet. This new worry was about my soul. The final and most profound betrayal was the quiet, steady erosion of my marriage. David and I no longer spoke of our own dreams. We only spoke of theirs. Our conversations were no longer about our garden or our health or the simple, quiet things that had bound us together for 45 years. They were about interest rates and truck warranties and my sister's latest financial catastrophe. The lottery ticket, which was now locked away in a safe deposit box, was a constant, unspoken presence in our house. It was a third person in our marriage, a wealthy, demanding, and incredibly seductive stranger who had my husband's complete and undivided attention. One evening, I tried to break through the wall of money that had grown between us. David, I said as he was scrolling through a yachting magazine, an absurd, glossy catalog of a life that was not ours. Do you remember that trip we always talked about taking? The one to the Grand Canyon? We could do that now. Just the two of us. He looked up from his magazine, his eyes distant, unfocused. The Grand Canyon? He said as if the words were from a foreign language. Martha, we can do better than that now. I was just looking at a 2-week cruise to the Greek islands. First class, of course. I don't want to go to the Greek islands, I said, my voice a small, quiet plea. I want to go to the Grand Canyon with you. He just sighed, a sound of deep and profound impatience. You're just not thinking big enough, Martha, he said, his voice full of that new condescending tone. He turned back to his magazine, dismissing me, dismissing our shared dream as if it were a childish, insignificant thing. I went to bed that night, and as I lay beside the stranger who was wearing my husband's face, a new and deeply terrifying thought began to take root in my mind. The money was a poison. It had not brought us happiness. It had infected us, all of us, with a sickness of the soul. And if I didn't find an antidote soon, it was going to destroy everything I had ever loved. My quiet refusal to participate in the giddy, frantic spending spree that had consumed my family was not met with understanding. It was met with a growing, palpable impatience. My silence, my hesitation, my simple requests to slow down and think about things bikri were not seen as prudence. They were seen as an obstacle. My family, who had once come to me for comfort and wisdom, now looked at me with a new, frustrating gaze. I was the dragon, sitting on a pile of gold they believed was rightfully theirs, and they were the brave knights, trying to figure out how to get past me. They decided to orchestrate a siege. They called it a family intervention, a phrase that was both deeply insulting and terrifyingly condescending. They ambushed me one evening after dinner. I was in my living room trying to read a book when they all filed in, a grim, determined deputation. My husband David, my son Michael, my daughter Jessica, and my sister Brenda. They sat in a semicircle around my armchair, trapping me. David, my husband of 45 years, was their chosen spokesman. He had a sheaf of papers in his hand, and he wore an expression of grave paternalistic concern, an expression he had borrowed from a bad television drama. Martha, he began, his voice full of a false gentle reason, we're all here because we love you. And we're worried about you. Worried about what, David? I asked, my voice a quiet, dangerous calm. This money, he said, gesturing with his hand as if the $4 million were a wild animal in the room with us. It's a huge responsibility, a huge stress, and we've all noticed that you seem overwhelmed. You're hesitant, you're not making clear decisions, you're not yourself, I see, I said. He then launched into a well-rehearsed presentation, a corporate takeover bid for my own life. He spoke of the need for a unified family financial strategy. My son, Michael, the contractor, chimed in with talk of long-term asset management. My daughter, Jessica, spoke of legal protections and estate planning. My sister, Brenda, just dabbed at her eyes with a tissue and whispered about the importance of family looking after family. It was a masterful and utterly transparent performance. And then came the final killing blow. David slid a thick, professionally prepared document onto the coffee table in front of me. "We've taken the liberty of consulting with a financial advisor," he said, his voice swelling with pride at his own foresight. "He has drafted a proposal for a comprehensive family trust. The Miller Family Legacy Trust." I picked up the document. The legalese was dense, but the meaning was brutally clear. The proposal was that I would place the entirety of the $4 million lottery winnings into this new trust. The trustees, the two people with the legal authority to manage and disperse all the funds, would be my husband, David, and my son, Michael. I, the woman who had won the money, would be designated as a primary beneficiary and would be granted a generous monthly stipend for my living expenses. I read the words, and a cold, silent, and profound rage began to build in my soul. This was not an intervention. This was a coup. They were, in the kindest, most loving, and most condescending way possible, attempting to have me declared financially incompetent. They were trying to steal my miracle, my independence, my future, and they were doing it with a smile, telling me it was for my own good. I looked up from the document and I surveyed their faces. They were all looking at me with the same expectant, pitying expression, the expressions of zookeepers trying to coax a confused and stubborn animal into a new, more secure cage. They thought I was a foolish, overwhelmed old woman. They had forgotten who I was. They had forgotten that I had managed this family's budget on a shoestring for 45 years, that I had raised 2 children, cared for a home, and navigated the world with a quiet competence they had always taken for granted. I was silent for a long time. I let them sit in their expectant, confident silence, and then I stood up. My movement was not the frail, uncertain motion of the woman they thought they were dealing with. It was the slow, deliberate, and powerful movement of a matriarch who was about to bring her house to order. "No," I said. The word was quiet, but it landed in the silent room with the force of a thunderclap. They all just stared at me, their mouths slightly agape, their well-rehearsed plans suddenly and completely derailed. What do you mean, no?" David finally stammered, his confident paternal mask faltering. I looked at the 4 of them, at my husband, my sister, my children, a united front of smiling, well-intentioned predators. "No," I repeated, and the word tasted of a new and wonderful and intoxicating freedom. "The trust is not happening. The financial advisor you consulted is fired. The money is mine. The dreams are mine to decide. And this conversation, this insulting, disrespectful, and deeply offensive conversation is over." I turned to David, to my husband. "I'm going to go and call a real lawyer now. A lawyer who will represent my interests, not yours." I looked back at my stunned, silent children and my weeping sister. "I suggest you all do the same." The stunned, angry silence that followed my declaration was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. I watched as the 4 of them, my husband, my children, my sister, processed the reality of my rebellion. Their faces moved through a rapid, ugly cycle of emotions, from shock to disbelief to a pure, incandescent rage. They had come to my home to stage a coup, to legally and lovingly strip me of my own fortune, and they had been met not with the tearful, confused compliance they had expected, but with the cold, hard and unyielding steel of a woman who had finally found her own spine. "What do you mean you're calling a lawyer?" David, my husband, finally sputtered, his face a blotchy, furious red. "I am your husband. We are a family. You don't bring lawyers into family matters." "You brought a legal trust document into my living room and tried to trick me into signing away my own life," I replied, my voice as calm and as cold as a winter morning. "That is when this stopped being a family matter, and that is when it became a legal one. Now, I believe I asked you all to leave." They did not leave gracefully. There were more sputtered threats, more accusations of selfishness, more tears from my sister Brenda. But the power dynamic in the room had been irrevocably altered. I was no longer their gentle, accommodating matriarch. I was a stranger in my own home, a woman they did not know, and a woman who was no longer afraid of them. They left, one by one, a defeated and resentful army in retreat, the slam of my own front door, the final satisfying punctuation mark on the end of my old life. The moment the house was quiet, I did exactly what I said I would do. I walked to the phone, and I called a lawyer. Not our small-town family lawyer who had known us for years. I was a multi-millionaire now, and I needed a different kind of soldier to fight this war. I got a referral from an old friend for the best and most ruthless financial litigator in Atlanta, a woman named Diana Davenport. The next morning, I walked into a sleek downtown law office that was a world away from my small suburban life. Diana Davenport was a woman in her 50s, impeccably dressed with sharp, intelligent eyes that seemed to assess my entire life story in the first 30 seconds of our meeting. I told her everything: the lottery win, the modest life, the sudden ravenous greed of my family, and the final disastrous intervention with the family trust document. I spoke without emotion, laying out the facts like a general briefing her commander on the state of the battlefield. When I was finished, she leaned back in her large leather chair, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across her face. "Well, Martha," she said, her voice a low, confident purr, "it seems to me you are not the one who is overwhelmed. You are the only one in your family who is thinking clearly. They have made a very, very big mistake. They have mistaken your kindness for weakness." She then laid out her strategy, and it was a masterpiece of aggressive, proactive warfare. "We are not going to wait for them to make the next move," she said, her eyes gleaming. "We are going to set the terms of this engagement. First, we will secure the asset. As soon as the winnings are processed, we will place them in a new, ironclad, irrevocable trust that only you control. Second, we will untangle every single joint financial account you have with your husband. And third," she said, her smile widening, "we are not waiting for him to file for divorce. You are. We will file for legal separation immediately on the grounds of financial coercion and extreme emotional distress." I walked out of that office feeling like I had just hired a 5-star general. For the first time since this nightmare began, I was not alone. The counterattack from my family was, as expected, emotional and manipulative. My phone was a constant barrage of texts and voicemails. David's messages were a mix of rage and a pathetic, wounded pleading. "Martha, what are you doing? You are tearing our family apart over a piece of paper." My children's texts were an endless, whining chorus of guilt trips. "Mom, you're being selfish. This is hurting everyone. Grandma, the kids miss you. Don't you miss them?" On the advice of my new general, I did not respond. I was building a wall. My new life began to take shape with a speed that was both terrifying and exhilarating. Diana advised me that my home as a long-term marital asset would be a major point of contention. She suggested I find a new temporary residence to establish my legal and financial independence. So, with a portion of my own personal savings that my lawyer had helped secure, I did not just rent a small, sad apartment. I made a statement. I bought a beautiful new condominium in a sleek high-rise downtown with a stunning panoramic view of the Atlanta skyline. It was an act of pure, unadulterated defiance. I spent the first night in my new, empty home sitting on the floor looking out at the glittering sea of city lights. My phone buzzed. It was a text from my daughter, Jessica. It was a picture of my two beautiful grandchildren, their faces sad, their eyes looking right at the camera. Beneath the picture, a single poison-tipped arrow of a sentence, "They miss their grandma." Don't you miss them? I looked at the picture of the two innocent children I loved more than life itself, their sweet faces now being used as a weapon in a war I had never asked for. I felt a pang of such deep, profound sadness it almost took my breath away. But as I looked around my new, empty, and beautiful home, a space that was entirely and completely my own, I knew the truth. I wasn't just fighting for my money. I was fighting for my life. I was fighting for the right to be more than just their grandmother, their mother, or their wife. I was fighting for the right to finally, after 68 long years, be myself. The picture of my grandchildren, sent as a guided missile of emotional blackmail, was the first salvo in my family's new coordinated war. I stared at their beautiful, innocent faces, and I felt the profound, gut-wrenching pain that Jessica had intended me to feel. For a moment, my resolve wavered. But then, the cold, clear voice of the new Amanda, the woman who had signed the deed to her own life, cut through the emotional fog. This was not a message of love. It was a tactic. I showed the text to my lawyer, Deanna, the next morning. She looked at it, her expression one of weary disgust. "Classic," she said, her voice dripping with scorn. "Textbook." When the direct assault fails, they send in the emotional infantry. They will try to make you feel so guilty for protecting yourself that you will willingly surrender. Do not engage. Do not reply. Every response, even an angry one, is a victory for them. It tells them they can still get to you. Her words were a much-needed fortification, and I would need every ounce of that strength because the siege was just beginning. For the next 2 weeks, my family engaged in a relentless, multi-pronged campaign of psychological warfare. David, my husband, took the role of the wounded, sentimental victim. He left me long, rambling voicemails, his voice thick with a fake, whiskey-soaked sorrow. He spoke of our 45 years together, of the memories, of the life we had built. "I don't understand what's happened to you, Martha." He'd weep into the phone. "This money has changed you. Don't let it destroy us. Please just come home." He never, of course, mentioned the $60,000 monument to his own greed that was still sitting in our old driveway. My sister Brenda was the arbiter of moral guilt. Her calls were full of a tearful, righteous indignation. "Do you have any idea what you're doing to this family?" she'd cry. "The children are a wreck. Jessica can't sleep. Michael is fighting with his wife. You're tearing everyone apart." What would Mama say if she could see you now, being so selfish, so cruel? Michael, my son, played the part of the concerned, logical intellectual. "Mom, I've done some research on that law firm you've hired," he said, his voice a calm, reasonable drone. "They're sharks. Litigators. They make their money by driving a wedge between families. They're using you. The trust proposal Dad and I made was a standard, responsible financial instrument. We were trying to protect you. Can't you see that they are the enemy, not us?" Every call, every message was a carefully aimed arrow designed to find a different weakness in my armor. They wanted me to feel guilty, to feel selfish, to feel foolish, and above all, to feel completely and utterly alone. And it almost worked. The constant barrage of their accusations, their pleas, their manufactured concern began to wear me down. I would sit in my beautiful empty condominium, the silence amplifying their voices in my head, and I would wonder if they were right. Was I the one destroying everything? My salvation came in the form of an old friend. Eleanor, a woman I had known since college, a sharp, funny, and fiercely intelligent woman who had been through her own brutal divorce years ago. I invited her to my new home, and over a pot of tea I unburdened myself, telling her the whole ugly and unbelievable story. She listened, her expression a mask of growing, furious disbelief. When I was finished, she reached across the table and took my hand. "Martha Miller," she said, her voice a low, powerful growl. "You listen to me. They are not trying to save you. They are trying to rob you, in broad daylight. They are not concerned for your well-being. They are terrified of your independence. What you are doing is not selfish. It is the sanest, bravest, and most necessary thing you have ever done. Do not you dare let them break you." Her words, so full of an unwavering righteous certainty, were the reinforcement I so desperately needed. She was right. This was a battle for my life, and I would not surrender. Strengthened by her support, I made my next move. I called Diana. "It's time to end it," I said. "Cut them off." That afternoon, a formal legal cease and desist letter was sent via courier to my husband, my sister, and both of my children. The letter was a masterpiece of cold legal finality. It stated that any and all future communications regarding financial, legal, or personal matters were to be directed solely and exclusively through Diana Davenport's office. It further stated that any attempt to contact me directly, by phone, by text, by email, or in person, with the intent to harass, intimidate, or emotionally manipulate me would be documented, recorded, and considered as evidence in the upcoming divorce and civil proceedings. The phone calls stopped. The texts stopped. The siege was over. That evening, I sat in the profound, beautiful, and complete silence of my new home. I had my money. I had my freedom. But as I looked around the beautiful, empty rooms, I couldn't escape the fact that to get them, I had been forced to take a torch to my own family. I had won the war, but I was now the lonely, solitary queen of a $4 million kingdom of one. And I had no idea if it would ever be enough to keep me warm. The silence that followed my legal ultimatum was a profound and terrifying thing. I had built a fortress around myself, and it had worked perfectly. The angry phone calls, the manipulative texts, the guilt-laden voicemails, they all stopped. I was finally, completely, and utterly alone. And in the first few days of that silence, the loneliness was a physical ache, a phantom limb where my family used to be. I threw myself into the work of the foundation with a desperate, frantic energy. It was my shield and my sanctuary. I spent my days in the sleek, glass-walled office of my lawyer, Diana, or in meetings with my new financial advisor. I, who had spent my life managing a household, was now learning the complex language of endowments, of tax law, of nonprofit governance. I was building a new life, a new identity, one legal clause at a time. The work was a blessing. It was the only thing that kept the ghosts at bay. The evenings were the hardest. I would come home to my beautiful, silent condominium, the city lights glittering outside my window like a galaxy of distant, unreachable stars. I would eat a simple dinner alone. I would try to read, but the words would blur on the page. In the quiet of the night, the voices of my own doubts were the loudest. Had I been too harsh? Had I destroyed my own family out of a selfish, wounded pride? My friend Eleanor was my lifeline. She would call me every evening. Her sharp, funny, and fiercely loyal voice, a beacon in my lonely world. "Stop it, Martha," she said to me one night. her voice a firm, loving command. Stop torturing yourself. You did not destroy your family. Your family tried to devour you, and you had the audacity to survive. There is a difference. Slowly, her words, and the simple, steady rhythm of my new, purposeful life began to heal the raw wounds. The work of the foundation became less of a frantic escape and more of a genuine passion. We began to receive the first applications for the Robert Smith Foundation grant, and the stories of these young, hopeful entrepreneurs were a powerful antidote to the poison of my own family's entitlement. There was a young woman with a brilliant plan for a mobile library, a bookmobile for underserved neighborhoods. There was a young man, a former gang member, who had developed a program to teach coding to at-risk youth. Their dreams, their grit, their determination to build something good in the world, it was the purest, most beautiful thing I had ever seen. I was not just managing a fortune, I was investing in hope. One afternoon, I was reviewing an application at a small coffee shop near my new home. I was so engrossed in the young applicant's business plan that I didn't notice the woman who had paused by my table until she spoke. "Excuse me," a soft, hesitant voice said. You're Martha Miller, aren't you?" I looked up. It was a woman my own age, with kind, tired eyes and a gentle smile. I recognized her vaguely from my old neighborhood, from the grocery store. Her name was Sarah. "Yes?" I said, a little surprised. "I heard you had moved downtown," she said, her hands twisting the strap of her purse. I just wanted to say what you did for your family, I think it was the bravest thing I have ever heard of." She looked at me, and her eyes filled with tears. "I have a son," she whispered. He has a problem, and I have been enabling him for years. I'm so afraid. But hearing your story, it gave me a little bit of courage." She just stood there for a moment, two strangers sharing a sacred and painful truth. And in that moment, I realized something profound. My story, my private, ugly, and heartbreaking story, was not just my own. It was a story that belonged to 1,000 other mothers, 1,000 other wives, 1,000 other women who had been made to feel guilty for demanding respect, for setting boundaries. After she left, I sat there, my coffee growing cold. The loneliness I had felt, the sense that I was a solitary queen in a kingdom of one, began to dissolve. I was not alone. I was part of a secret, silent sisterhood. That evening, I did something I had not done since the lottery win. I went for a walk, with no destination in mind. I ended up in front of a small, beautiful old church, its doors open to the evening air. On an impulse, I went inside. I sat in a back pew, the scent of old wood and beeswax a comforting balm. I was not a particularly religious woman, but I sat in the quiet of that holy place and I prayed. I did not pray for my family to forgive me. I did not pray for my loneliness to go away. I prayed for the young woman with the bookmobile. I prayed for the young man who wanted to teach coding. And I prayed for Sarah, the woman from the coffee shop, and for her own lost son. I prayed for all the people who were fighting their own quiet, desperate battles. And as I sat there, a profound and beautiful sense of peace began to settle over me. The money, the lawsuit, the family drama, it all began to shrink, to take its proper place in the larger story of my life. I had spent the last few months fighting a war to protect my husband's legacy. But I realize now that my true legacy, the one that I would build for myself, would not be about money. It would be about this, about using the strength I had found in my own battle to help others find the strength to fight theirs. The money was not the gift. It was just the tool. The real gift was the purpose it had finally, after 68 long years, given me. The months that followed my decision to cut off my family were a time of quiet, powerful, and profound reconstruction. The initial, terrifying silence that had filled my life was slowly replaced by a new kind of sound. The busy, hopeful, and deeply satisfying sound of a new life being built, brick by brick. My fortress of solitude began to transform into a vibrant, bustling headquarters of hope. The Robert Smith Foundation for Young Entrepreneurs was not just a name on a legal document. It was a living, breathing entity, and it became the center of my universe. I had spent my life in the service of a family that had ultimately seen me as a resource to be plundered. Now I was in the service of a new kind of family, a family of dreamers, of fighters, of young people, with nothing but a brilliant idea and the courage to pursue it. We awarded our first round of grants in the fall. The recipients were a testament to the quiet, hard-working spirit of my late husband, Robert. There was the young woman with the bookmobile, who now had a beautifully retrofitted van filled with books, bringing the magic of reading to the city's poorest neighborhoods. There was the young man who had created the coding program for at-risk youth. He now had a small but fully equipped computer lab, a safe haven where kids could learn to build a future instead of just surviving their present. I did not just write the checks. I became a mentor. I would visit their projects, listen to their struggles and their triumphs. I, who had been told I was a foolish, overwhelmed old woman, was now dispensing the quiet, practical wisdom I had accumulated over a lifetime of managing budgets, of solving problems, of simply getting things done. These young people did not see me as a bank account. They saw me as an ally, a champion. They gave me a respect my own family had been unable to muster. As my new life was blooming, the old one was withering on the vine. The legal battle for my divorce from David was a slow, grinding, and utterly one-sided affair. Deprived of the weapon of emotional manipulation, he and his lawyers had nothing left but bluster and delays. Their legal strategy was to portray me as a vindictive, unstable woman who had been driven mad by a sudden fortune. My lawyer, Diana, was a master surgeon. In my deposition, she had me calmly and methodically lay out the 45 years of our shared financial life. I produced the decades of handwritten ledgers, the budgets, the canceled checks for our children's educations, the proof of a lifetime of my own careful, prudent management. Then Diana presented the evidence of David's reckless spending in the weeks after the lottery win. The $60,000 car, the credit advance for a yachting magazine subscription. The narrative of the overwhelmed, foolish old woman crumbled to dust under the sheer, undeniable weight of the facts. David was not the responsible patriarch, trying to protect his flighty wife. He was a man who had been given a taste of unlimited wealth and had immediately lost his mind. The first real crack in my old family's unified front came not from a lawyer, but from a grocery store cashier. I was in my old neighborhood, visiting my friend Eleanor, when I ran into a woman who had known my daughter Jessica for years. After a few minutes of awkward small talk, the woman leaned in, her voice a low, conspiratorial whisper. "I heard about what happened with Jessica's husband Tom," she said, her eyes full of a pitying, gossipy light. "It's a real shame." "He's a good man." My heart gave a painful lurch. "What about Tom?" I asked, my voice carefully neutral. "Oh, you didn't know?" she said, her eyes widening. "She kicked him out. A few weeks ago, said she couldn't be married to a man with no ambition who wasn't willing to fight for what the family deserved. He's living with his brother now." The poor man is heartbroken. I thanked her for the information, my mind reeling. Jessica, my sweet, quiet daughter, had thrown her good, hard-working husband out of their home because he had not been a willing participant in her campaign to plunder my fortune. The poison of the lottery win was not just destroying my own marriage, it was destroying my children's as well. I went home to my beautiful, quiet condominium, the news a heavy stone in my heart. The family I had known was not just broken, it was diseased. The greed was a cancer, and it was metastasizing, consuming everything good and decent in its path. That night, I sat at my desk, the glittering lights of the city a cold, indifferent backdrop. I looked at the business plan for a new grant applicant, a young chef who wanted to start a food truck that would provide free, healthy lunches to homeless shelters. It was a plan full of hope, of goodness, of a desire to build something beautiful in the world. And I knew, with a certainty that was as clear and as cold as the glass in my window, that I had made the right choice. My old family was a lost cause, a sinking ship of their own making. My new family, this family of dreamers and builders, was the only one that mattered now. And I would use every dollar I had and every ounce of strength in my soul to make sure their ship would sail. The news about Jessica and her husband Tom was a somber confirmation of a truth I was beginning to understand. The lottery money was not a blessing. It was a catalyst, an accelerant, a chemical agent that had been poured onto the hairline cracks in my family's foundation, causing the entire structure to crumble into dust. The greed was a sickness, and my children were its first and most willing victims. The legal battle with David was the main front in this new Cold War. His lawyers, as Diana had predicted, came out swinging. They filed a motion to have me undergo a full psychiatric evaluation, claiming that my sudden and erratic behavior since the lottery win was proof of my mental incompetence. They painted a picture of a simple, sheltered homemaker who had been driven mad by a sum of money she could not comprehend, a woman who was now under the thumb of a predatory big city lawyer who was isolating her from her loving, concerned family. It was a brilliant, vicious, and utterly false narrative, and in the courtroom, it fell apart under the calm, steady, and undeniable weight of the truth. I sat for my deposition, not as a frightened, emotional old woman, but as the quiet, competent bookkeeper I had been for 45 years. When their lawyers questioned my financial acumen, I did not argue. I simply produced the evidence. Decades of my own handwritten household ledgers detailing every dollar earned and every penny spent. I showed them the investment statements I had managed, the tax returns I had prepared. I was not a woman who was overwhelmed by money. I was a woman who had spent her entire life mastering the art of stretching a single dollar into two. Then, Diana, my brilliant lawyer, went on the offensive. She presented the evidence of David's own financial behavior since the win, the $60,000 luxury SUV, the credit statements showing thousands of dollars spent on expensive suits, golf clubs, and a down payment for a membership at a country club we had never been able to afford. The man who was claiming his wife was too unstable to manage a fortune was the very same man who had set a torch to a small portion of it the moment he got his hands on it. The judge, a sharp, discerning woman in her late 60s, saw the truth with a crystal clarity. Their motion for a psychiatric evaluation was not just denied, it was dismissed with a stern warning to David's legal team about wasting the court's time. We had won the first battle, but while I was fighting the war in the courtroom, the poison of the money continued its destructive work on the home front. The next casualty was my son, Michael. He called me late one night, a month after the news about Jessica had reached me. His voice was a low, rough, and broken whisper, a voice I had not heard since he was a teenager who had just had his heart broken for the first time. "Mom," he said, "it's over." She left me. She took the kids. I listened, my own heart aching, as he told me the story. His wife, a woman who had married him for his ambition and his family's comfortable middle-class stability, had not signed up for this. The promise of a multi-million-dollar windfall had ignited a fire of greed in her, a fire that was quickly extinguished when she realized the money was not coming. My refusal to fund their new, lavish lifestyle had become the central, corrosive conflict in their marriage. His failure to manage his own mother, to secure their rightful share, was, in her eyes, a sign of his weakness. The final blow, he told me, was the collapse of his contracting business. For years, I now realized, his business had been propped up by a series of quiet, unofficial loans from his father and me. A few thousand here to cover payroll, a few thousand there for a new piece of equipment. We had always been his safety net. And his wife, I now understood, had always seen us as an extension of their own bank account. When the money from me was cut off, and the new big-ticket jobs he had taken on in anticipation of a huge cash infusion fell through, his business had imploded. He was facing bankruptcy, and his wife, seeing that the comfortable life she had envisioned was now a smoking ruin, had packed her bags, taken their children, and gone back to her parents' house. She said I was a failure, he whispered into the phone, his voice thick with a shame so profound it was a physical thing. She said I was just like you, Mom. Too weak to fight for what I deserved, I listened to my son's heartbroken, pathetic story, and I felt a wave of something that was both pity and a cold, hard rage. He was not a victim in this. He was a willing participant in the initial attack on me. His own greed, his own entitlement, had been the tinder for the fire that had now consumed his own life. "What do you want from me, Michael?" I asked, my voice quiet but not unkind. "I don't know," he sobbed. "I have nothing. The business is gone. My family is gone. I'm going to lose the house. I have nowhere to go." He was not asking for a handout, not this time. He was a man at the absolute bottom, a man who had lost everything, calling the very person he had tried to help betray. It was a cry for help from the ruins. And he was my son, my foolish, weak, and now completely broken son. I closed my eyes. The old Amanda would have rushed in, would have offered him a room, a check, a soft place to land. But I was not that woman anymore. I had learned the hard way that true love is not about saving your children from the consequences of their choices. It is about having the strength to let them face them. "I am so sorry for the pain you are in, Michael," I said, my voice a steady, quiet line of a new and terrible kind of love. "But I cannot fix this for you. This is a mess of your own making. You are a 40-year-old man. It is time you learned to clean up your own." I hung up the phone, my hand trembling, my heart a battlefield of love and a new, hard-won wisdom. I had just turned away my own son in his hour of greatest need. It was the hardest and the most necessary act of motherly love I had ever committed. The phone call where I turned away my son was the hardest and most necessary act of my life. It was the final brutal surgery to sever the diseased limb of my old family. The silence that followed was absolute. Michael did not call back. Jessica did not text. David did not leave any more pathetic, pleading voicemails. The siege was truly, finally over. And in the quiet, echoing emptiness of that silence, I began for the first time to hear my own voice. My new life, the one I was building in the clean, bright spaces of my downtown condominium, took on a new and powerful momentum. The legal battle with David, which had been the thunderous, ugly soundtrack to my days, now seemed like a distant, irrelevant noise. Diana, my lawyer, handled it with her usual brilliant and ruthless efficiency. She presented the courts with the undeniable evidence of my 45 years of financial stewardship and the equally undeniable evidence of David's brief but spectacular descent into reckless, ego-driven spending. His case, the case of the concerned husband trying to protect his overwhelmed and unstable wife, was revealed to be what it always was: a transparent and pathetic lie. The final settlement meeting was not a negotiation. It was an unconditional surrender. We met one last time in that cold, sterile conference room. David sat across the long, polished table from me, a shrunken gray man, the manic, lottery-fueled confidence completely gone, replaced by a sullen, defeated emptiness. He would not meet my eyes. His lawyers, their faces grim, accepted our terms. The original lottery winnings, now legally secured in my own name, were mine and mine alone. I was awarded the full, unencumbered ownership of our old house, the brick ranch I had spent 45 years turning into a home. David was granted a small, legally mandated portion of our shared marital savings, enough to live on, but not enough to fund the lavish, ridiculous fantasies he had been indulging. It was a fair, just, and utterly devastating end to his short-lived reign as a self-proclaimed financial titan. As we were signing the final papers, he finally looked at me. His eyes were not angry. They were just empty. "Was it worth it, Martha?" he whispered, his voice the dry rustle of dead leaves. Was all this worth it? I looked at the man I had spent a lifetime with, the stranger who now sat across from me. "I didn't start this war, David," I said, my voice quiet and steady. "I just finished it." I walked out of that law office and into the bright afternoon sun, a free woman. I did not feel triumphant. I did not feel happy. I felt only a profound and somber sense of closure. A 50-year chapter of my life was over. The book was closed. That very afternoon, I made 2 phone calls. The first was to a real estate agent. I listed my old house, the one I had just won, for sale. I had no desire to return to that place of ghosts and bad memories. The second call was to the young woman who was our foundation's first and most promising grant recipient, the one with the plan for the bookmobile. "Elena," I said when she answered, "I have some good news for you. The foundation is making its first major capital investment. I'm donating a property to the cause. How would you like to have a permanent physical headquarters for your literacy program?" 3 months later, I stood on the neat green lawn of my old house. But it was not my house anymore. The front yard where my grandchildren had once played was now filled with the happy, chattering voices of children from all over the city. A brightly painted, beautiful bookmobile was parked in the driveway. The house itself had been transformed into the Robert Smith Literacy Center, a vibrant, welcoming space with a free library, tutoring rooms, and a community garden where my own beloved roses now bloomed for everyone. The proceeds from the sale of the house, combined with the remaining lottery funds, created a massive endowment that would fund the foundation's work for generations to come. I had taken the money that had been the source of my family's ugly, destructive greed, and I had laundered it. I had washed it clean in the waters of generosity and purpose. As I stood there, watching a little girl who reminded me of my own granddaughter, Lily, choose a book from a shelf, my phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. I opened it. It was a single, grainy photograph of my son, Michael, standing in the line at a soup kitchen downtown. He looked thin, tired, and completely broken. Beneath the photo, a single, anonymous, and clearly malicious sentence. "Is this what your tough love looks like?" I stared at the picture of my son, at the pathetic, tragic end of the path he had chosen. The old Amanda would have been destroyed. The old Amanda would have run to him, checkbook in hand. But I was not the old Amanda. I looked from the picture of my broken son to the sight of the happy, hopeful children in the library that now stood where my broken home used to be. My heart ached for the boy I had lost, a deep and unending ache that I knew I would carry with me for the rest of my days. But the choice I had made was not a choice between my son and my money. It was a choice between the past and the future. I deleted the text message. I put my phone in my pocket. and I walked into the library, into the future I had chosen to build, leaving the ghosts of my past to their own hungry and desolate devices. 3 years passed. The legal battles, the bitter accusations, the profound gut-wrenching heartbreak of my family's betrayal, they did not disappear, but they receded, like a storm that has passed, leaving behind a landscape that is forever changed, but finally, blessedly at peace. The woman I had been, the quiet, accommodating, and perpetually worried Martha Miller, was a ghost from a different lifetime. The woman I had become was the architect of a new world. That world was on full, vibrant display on a bright, sunny Saturday in September. I stood on the familiar, manicured lawn of my old brick ranch, but it was not my home anymore. It was the Robert Smith Literacy Center, and it was the day of our 3rd annual Community Reading Festival. The yard was filled with a joyful, chaotic sea of families from all over the city. There was a bouncy castle where the garage used to be, a barbecue pit smoking where my prize-winning roses once grew, and everywhere there were children, their faces alight with the magic of stories. The bookmobile, the very first project my foundation had ever funded, was parked in the driveway, its doors thrown open, children spilling in and out with armfuls of books. The young woman, Elena, who had come to me with that simple, beautiful dream, was now the executive director of the center, a respected and beloved leader in her own right. I moved through the crowd, not as a wealthy benefactor, but as a part of the community I had helped to build. People greeted me not with the fawning deference that money often elicits, but with a genuine, warm affection. "Miss Martha, thank you for this. Miss Martha, my son just read his first whole book because of you." My new family was all around me. My fierce lawyer Diana was flipping burgers at the grill, laughing with a group of teenagers. My dear friend Eleanor was reading a story aloud to a captivated circle of toddlers. This was my tribe. This was the legacy I had chosen to build. It was a legacy of hope, of community, of second chances. Later that afternoon, as I was sitting on the porch, my old porch, watching the happy chaos, Eleanor came and sat beside me, handing me a tall glass of lemonade. "Look at what you've built, Martha," she said, her voice full of a quiet, profound pride. "It's incredible." "We built it," I corrected her gently. We sat in a comfortable silence for a moment, watching the families. Have you heard from any of them?" Eleanor asked, her voice soft, the question one she had not asked in a very long time. "No," I said, and the word was not full of the old pain. It was just a simple, quiet fact. Not a word. The divorce was finalized 2 years ago. The checks from the settlement are mailed to a P.O. box for David every month. My sister Brenda, I'm told, moved to Florida, and the children, they have their own lives now, their own choices. I had made my peace with it. The love for them would always be a part of me, a phantom ache in my heart. But the grief, the anger, the sense of betrayal, that was gone, washed away by the new, purposeful life I had built. It was in that moment of quiet acceptance that I saw a car pull up to the curb, a modest, slightly beaten-up sedan that was a world away from the luxury vehicles that had once crowded my driveway. A man got out of the driver's side. He was older, thinner, with a few more gray hairs at his temples, but I recognized him instantly. It was Tom, my former son-in-law, the good, quiet man my daughter Jessica had so cruelly discarded. He opened the back door and 2 small figures scrambled out. Lily, now 11, and Noah, 9, my grandchildren. My heart stopped. I hadn't seen them, not in person, in almost 3 years. They had grown. They looked hesitant, shy, standing by the car, looking at the festival at the house at me. Tom saw me then, and he gave a small, uncertain wave. He said something to the children, and they began to walk toward the porch, their steps slow and tentative. He was a good father. He had not poisoned them against me. He had simply waited until the time was right. I stood up, my legs feeling a little unsteady. This was the one ghost I thought I would never have to face, the one consequence of my war that I had believed was permanent. I looked at my grandchildren, at their beautiful, innocent faces, a heartbreaking and perfect mixture of my daughter's features and their good father's kind eyes. They were innocents, the true victims in a war they had never understood. The high, impenetrable wall I had so carefully built around my heart, the wall designed to keep the greedy, the cruel, and the entitled out, had not been designed for this. I had never considered what I would do if love, in its purest, most complicated, and most precious form, came knocking at the gate. I stood on the porch of my old life, looking at the two small, hesitant figures who represented my only link to a future with my own blood. For a moment, my heart was a battlefield. The general in me, the woman who had fought so hard to build a fortress around her peace, screamed to raise the drawbridge and lock the gates. But the grandmother in me, a woman I was only just beginning to know, simply ached to hold them. Tom, their father, was a good and decent man, and I could see the nervous apprehension in his eyes. He walked up the porch steps alone, a humble ambassador on a difficult mission. "Martha," he began, his voice quiet and full of a deep, weary respect, "I am so sorry to just show up like this. I hope this isn't an intrusion." "It's good to see you, Tom," I said, and the words were true. "Listen," he said, his gaze direct and honest. "I know things are complicated. Jessica is not well, and Michael, well, you know. But the kids, they don't have any of that poison in them. They're good kids, and they deserve to know their grandmother. I've been following what you've been doing with the foundation with this center. It's an incredible thing. I want them to have a woman like you in their lives." He took a deep breath. "I'm not here to ask for anything. Not a dollar, not a bit of help. I just want to ask if you would be willing to let them know you." I looked past him at my grandchildren who were watching us with wide, uncertain eyes. And the walls around my heart, the walls I had built so high to protect myself, simply dissolved. I knelt down so I was on their level. "Hello, Lily." "Hello, Noah," I said, my voice a little thick. "I'm your Grandma Martha. I have missed you both very, very much." That first visit was a slow, delicate dance of getting to know each other again. I did not take them to my new, unfamiliar condominium. I took them into the heart of my new life, the literacy center. In the very rooms where their mother and uncle had plotted to steal my future, I sat on a brightly colored rug with my grandchildren and I read them a story about a brave little mouse who outsmarted a greedy cat. We spent the afternoon in the kids' reading corner, a space filled with light and laughter and the infinite magical possibility of the written word. Before they left, I had a quiet word with Tom. "I would love to be in their lives," I said, my voice firm but not unkind. "But there is one non-negotiable rule. I cannot have any contact with their mother or with my son. The peace I have found is a fragile thing, and I will not risk it. Not for anyone." Tom nodded, his expression one of complete and utter understanding. "Martha," he said, "you will never have to worry about that. I promise." And so, a new routine began. Every other Saturday, Tom would drop Lily and Noah off at my new home, the sleek, modern condominium that was so different from the house they remembered. And in that new space, we began to build a new kind of family. Our time together was not about expensive gifts or lavish outings, the currency their other grandparents had tried to deal in. It was about simple, precious things. We baked cookies in my new kitchen, their laughter filling the space. We worked in my small rooftop garden, their small hands learning the magic of planting a seed and watching it grow. We went to museums, we went to the park, and we read hundreds of books. I was not just their grandmother. I was their teacher. I was teaching them, in 100 small, quiet ways, the lessons their parents had failed to learn. The lesson of kindness, the lesson of curiosity, the lesson of finding joy not in what you can acquire, but in what you can create. One afternoon, a few months into our new routine, we were sitting on my sofa looking through one of the old photo albums I had managed to save. Lily, my granddaughter, was tracing a finger over a picture of her own mother, Jessica, as a little girl, her face bright and full of a hope that was now long gone. "Grandma," she asked, her voice full of a child's simple, direct curiosity, "why don't we see Mommy and Uncle Michael anymore?" It was the question I had been dreading, the one I knew I would one day have to answer. I looked at her sweet, innocent face, and I chose my words with the care of a woman planting a delicate and important seed. "Sometimes, honey," I said softly, pulling her into a gentle hug. "Grown-ups get a little bit sick in their hearts. Not like a cold or a flu, but a sickness of sadness and confusion. And when that happens, they need a lot of quiet, grown-up time to try and get better." It was the kindest and the truest explanation I could offer a child. She accepted it with a simple, solemn nod and then turned the page. I held her close, my heart aching with the love so fierce it was a physical pain. My final and most important job was not just to protect these children from the poison of the past. It was to arm them with enough love, enough truth, and enough quiet strength to build their own healthier and more beautiful future. 5 years, a half-decade. It is a length of time that can feel like a blink of an eye, or it can be a vast, transformative epoch in which an entire world can be unmade and built anew. For me, it was the latter. The woman who had sat in that sterile lawyer's office, a refugee from her own life, a queen of a silent $4 million kingdom of one, was a distant ancestor to the woman I am today. My life is no longer quiet. It is filled with the most beautiful, chaotic, and joyful noise imaginable. The Robert Smith Literacy Center, the house where I once raised my own children, is now the place where I am helping to raise a communities. It is a thriving, vibrant hub of hope, a place where the sound of children laughing as they discover the magic of a new story is the daily soundtrack. The foundation, the legacy I built from the ashes of my family's greed has become a force for good in our city. We have funded dozens of young dreamers, we have launched bookmobiles, and we have created a safe, beautiful space where the only currency that matters is a child's curiosity. My late husband's name, the name my own children had tried to tarnish with their entitlement, was now synonymous with hope and opportunity. His legacy was not just secure, it was magnificent. My own family, the one that had been shattered, had been miraculously and carefully rebuilt. But it was a different structure now, built on a new and stronger foundation. The relationship with my grandchildren, Lily and Noah, became the central, anchoring joy of my life. Every other Saturday became our sacred time. We did not just bake cookies, we delivered them to the local fire station. We did not just work in my rooftop garden, we volunteered at the community garden at the Literacy Center, teaching other children the magic of planting a seed. I was not just their grandmother, I was their guide, teaching them, in 100 small, quiet ways, the profound and simple joy of a life of service. The ghosts of my past rarely visited anymore. The final legal ties to David had been severed years ago in a quiet, anticlimactic settlement. He had taken his small, court-mandated share and disappeared into a new, smaller life of his own making. My sister Brenda, after a few more years of self-inflicted drama, had finally, blessedly, moved to Florida. Her endless needs now someone else's problem. And my children. They remained a quiet, persistent ache in a distant corner of my heart. I would hear whispers of their lives through the grapevine. Jessica, I was told, had never remarried. She had a series of low-paying jobs, a life of quiet, bitter resentment. Michael, after losing his business and his family, had drifted, a man defined by the consequences of the choices he had made. The last I heard, he was working as a handyman in a different state. The great glittering fortune they had been willing to destroy their own mother for had resulted in nothing but the ashes of their own lives. The final and most beautiful chapter of my own story began on a perfect sunny afternoon in May. It was the Foundation's 5th anniversary festival. The lawn of the Literacy Center was a sea of happy, celebrating families. I was standing on the porch watching the beautiful, chaotic scene when I saw them. My grandchildren, now a confident 13 and 11, were at the center of it all, not as guests, but as leaders. Lily was reading a story aloud to a circle of wide-eyed toddlers, her voice clear and full of a gentle authority. And Noah was helping a younger boy build a small, wobbly model rocket, his face a mask of patient concentration. They were good, kind, and compassionate young people. The best of their father, Tom, and the best of me had won. As I was watching them, a man approached me, his steps hesitant. He was older, thinner, with a face that was a roadmap of a hard-lived life. It took me a moment to recognize him. It was Michael, my son. He stood at the bottom of the porch steps, not as a demanding child, but as a humble, broken man. He did not ask for money. He did not ask for forgiveness. "Mom," he said, his voice a rough, unfamiliar whisper, I've been clean for a year now. I've been working. I wanted to see this. The thing you built. He looked out at the joyful crowd, at the happy children, at the vibrant legacy that had been built in the ruins of his own greed. It's beautiful, he said, his voice cracking. I'm so proud of you. I looked at my son, the boy I had lost, the man who had finally, after a long and brutal journey, found his way back to some semblance of himself. The anger was gone. The resentment was gone. All that was left was the deep, quiet, and unconditional love of a mother. I am proud of you too, Michael, I said. It was not a reunion. It was not a promise of a return to the old ways. It was simply an acknowledgement, a quiet, peaceful moment of closure. Later that evening, as the last of the families were leaving and the volunteers were packing up, my grandchildren came and sat on either side of me on the porch swing. It was a good day, Grandma, Lily said, leaning her head on my shoulder. The best, Noah agreed, his own small head resting on my other side. I sat there, between the two beautiful, precious souls who were the true and lasting treasure of my life. I thought of the lottery ticket, the flimsy $5 piece of paper that had been both a curse and a blessing. It had been a test. A brutal, fiery test that had burned my old, comfortable, and fraudulent life to the ground. But in the ashes, it had revealed the truth. The money was never the prize. The real winnings were this peace, this purpose, this love, a legacy built not on what you are given, but on what you choose to give back. And as I sat there, in the quiet, perfect twilight with my real family beside me, I knew, with every fiber of my being, that I was the richest woman in the world.